So Matt, what would you say if you unsuccessfully are dealing with a conflict and in so doing you create a lot of damage in the process? How do you move from a place of conflict to a place of resolution when maybe things weren't handled the way that they should be?
Yeah, and that's tough because we've probably always been there before. All of us have responded in ways that we look back on and say, oh, I wish I hadn't said that, or I wish I had done this differently. So what do? Hopefully we don't just agree to say, I'm just going to not talk to that person anymore, or I'm just going to try to avoid this person or this situation. No, we want to still try to pursue that conflict resolution. And in order to do that, there's first step that's the most important one is to acknowledge your own role in the conflict. It's try to take some ownership of what you did wrong. And in order to do that, there's a level of apology or confession that needs to be made to the person that you've offended, or maybe how you've acted irresponsibly or inappropriately towards. And so we'd like to introduce what's called the 7 A's of confession. And these are the types of things you want to keep in mind when addressing this and trying to bring about a sense of restitution with a person, that your confession would reflect these elements. And that's going to be the best way for it to be well received and for it to be perceived with sincerity, which is hopefully the way that you're trying to address this person. All right, so let's go through these 7 A's of confession. And the first one is to address the people that are involved. If this is just a conflict between one person, then let's just keep it between one person. You go and you discuss things directly with them and apologize for what you've done, taking that ownership of your role in the conflict. If maybe it impacted a whole team of people, then it would be good to go and discuss this with each one of them and say, I'm sorry for what I said and how that impacted you in this particular situation or with this patient, and kind of work your way through the team that maybe was offended or impacted by how you respond. The second A is to avoid, and we want to avoid the use of if and but and maybe language when apologizing to somebody. Let me explain what I mean by that. If you come to somebody and you say, if I offended you, I'm sorry, there's a lack of sincerity or ownership because you're almost bringing it into question, right? Secondly, if you say, I'm sorry that I offended you, but you need to understand where I was coming from, or but you did this. Again, there can be a blame shifting or a justifying attitude or tone to that that's going to undercut any type of apology you're trying to make. And again, kind of the idea of maybe, and say, well, maybe I should have done things differently when we were working together last week. Again, that's not taking that type of ownership. It's not really letting that person know that you're sorry for what you did. Oh, that then leads us to our third A, which is to admit specifically. Okay? It's one thing to say you're sorry that we had this conflict, but the other person's going to understand it and understand that you really are sorry if you're able to say specifically what you did and specifically what they were offended by. So you can say, I'm sorry that I came across disrespectfully in nursing rounds or whatever it was, the setting that you may have found yourself in when I made that offhand comment or when I rolled my eyes or something like that. And you're really specifically identifying the action, the attitude, or the words that you used. That other person is going to be much more receptive because it's like, oh, okay, they understand what they did and they're owning up to it. So that's an important one. The next A is to acknowledge the hurt that you caused. Maybe you have hurt this person's feelings, by what you said. Maybe it hurt their standing amongst the team that they work with or that they supervise because you undermined their authority. So acknowledging, hey, there were some results of what I did that I know were harmful to you, and I really need you to, forgive me for what I did in this situation. The next A then is to accept consequences. Accepting the consequences is realizing, hey, what I did might not just go away by saying I'm sorry. You might need to go and make restitution. So maybe it was a peer and a colleague that you're in a conflict with, and it got back to your supervisor, and you're not sure how the supervisor's viewing either one of you or that situation, right? And so part of accepting the consequences is saying, I got to go own up and say, actually, that was my fault. This person really, they weren't at fault in this situation. I blamed them, or I did something that undermined them. You're making restitution. And again, it just is reinforcing the sincerity of this confession and of this apology to that person because of how you're following up with that. And then the next A is to alter behavior. Again, a very sincere apology can be helpful. It can be a good step forward in terms of conflict resolution. But if the next time you're in a tense situation, you lash out with an emotional response, you say something that's inappropriate, you maybe are disrespectful, or you don't even listen to what your supervisor is saying or directing you to do, that's going to make your confession or your apology seem like it was just words. And that relationship is not going to be reconciled. You're not going to see a good path forward between the two of you because your words will come across as being empty, right? And so if your attitudes and your actions begin to show a level of change and that you've adjusted them, it's going to really help this relationship and say, okay, yeah, this person meant what they said. And maybe you're not perfect, but wow, I see a big difference. They're biting their tongue, or they are responding in a way that's really helpful instead of pushing back when we find ourselves in these tense situations. And then the last A is to ask for forgiveness. Now, this might seem like we've been assuming it all along, but it's one thing to say, hey, I shouldn't have done that the other day. I'm sorry about that. Or, hey, I wish I hadn't responded the way that I did. I'm not going to do that anymore. That's fine and good, but if you actually say, I'm indebted to you, would you be willing to forgive me for what I did? It shows a great level of humility and a level that you really care about this person. We had said that earlier. It's important to be affirming the relationship. And so out of respect, you're saying, will you forgive me? Because I need you to offer that forgiveness or extend that so that we can really respect each other and work well together moving forward. So that's that's a great place to start. If you're somebody that was maybe to blame in the situation, you can say, I've got to, acknowledge this and acknowledge my role in the conflict. But maybe you're on the other side of it. Maybe somebody's coming to you and asking for forgiveness. How do you know that you've actually offered forgiveness to somebody? And how do you know if this relationship is going to move forward and that you aren't just responding with words of saying, yeah, that's fine, or yeah, I forgive you? How do you know that your forgiveness that you're extending is going to help heal this situation and bring this resolution? Well, we think that there's 4 promises, the 4 promises of forgiveness that demonstrate that it's not just words, but that forgiveness has been extended. So let's talk through those 4 promises here. The first is a promise, I will not dwell on this incident anymore. When you've been through a conflict, it's easy to kind of get obsessed with it or preoccupied. You're thinking about it a lot. You keep bringing it up in conversation. It just keeps being addressed in different scenarios. If this person has come to you and confessed in a way that we just described and has asked for forgiveness, then it's time for you to say, okay, I forgive you, and to show that that's true, I'm going to stop dwelling on this. I'm going to stop obsessing about this. The second promise is that I will not bring this incident up again and use this incident against you. And this is unfortunately a really important one because when conflict goes unresolved, it's kind of always in the back of your mind about that person. Or maybe it's something that you keep in your back pocket. And in an ugly, heated moment, you might throw that back out at the person and blame them and say, oh, well, this is just like the time you did this to me. Or you even might say that to another person. And so true forgiveness is saying, you know what, I'm not going to hold this. I'm not going to keep bringing this up. This is not something I'm going to weaponize against you, either interpersonally or as a part of a team. But we're going to let this thing go. We're going to move forward from this conflict, right? And then the third promise is I will not talk to anybody else about this incident. This is a huge one because this needs to stay between you and the other person. The person says they offended you, and so they're coming to you for forgiveness. You need to extend that, and that means I'm not going to bring that up to you anymore, and I'm not going to bring it up to anybody else. Because if you do, you're really now the person at fault. You're now the one that is slandering or gossiping about a coworker, and you've certainly not shown forgiveness if you're willing to continue to allow this issue to be something that's discussed and something that is putting the other person down. And then the fourth promise is that I will not allow this incident to stand between us and our personal relationship or our working relationship anymore. Maybe after a conflict that's been really poorly handled takes place, that the two people they might want to say, I don't want to work on the same shift with that person anymore, or I can't serve the same patient with this person anymore. I can't get along with this person. Well, after there's been this type of reconciliation, there's been a confession and forgiveness extended. True forgiveness would say, like, yeah, let's try to work together again. And maybe it starts professionally. Maybe you keep your eyes on the patient, but hopefully it leads into a good personal relationship as well, and that you can see that restored, and that's part of truly offering forgiveness to someone. Okay, so today we had this discussion, and we gave an overview of the pause principle, the 7 A's of confession, and those 4 promises of forgiveness. And our hope is that these could be helpful if you find yourself in a place of conflict now or in the future in your workplace.